banks don't want you to know this, but that friendly pop-up asking for your income might actually be a trap designed to extract more profit from you.
And today we're looking at a piece that argues exactly that you shouldn't voluntarily update your income with credit card companies.
It's a high-stakes premise, really full of natural tension. So let's get straight into how to make this argument sharper and more bulletproof.
Absolutely.
We have to start with the narrative structure, because the way it's drafted now, it kind of buries the lead.
Yes.
The material is great at warning about the dangers of higher credit limits, but, the most compelling proof of the whole argument, the smoking gun, is hidden way at the end.
That was the first thing that jumped out at me. I'm reading through pages of theory about algorithms and data decay, and it's all a bit dry.
Right.
And then suddenly on the last page, I find this incredible story about a contractor friend.
Oh yeah, the contractor.
She was making $8,000 a month. Everything was peaceful. She voluntarily tells the bank she's now making $15,000. And immediately, her relationship with them just turns into a sales war zone.
Exactly. The weakness here is just a classic case of telling before showing. By placing that anecdote at the very end, the listener has to slog through all this abstract theory without any emotional anchor. The theory feels academic until you see the human cost.
It really risks losing the audience before you even make your best point.
Totally.
If I'm listening, I need to know why I should care about this algorithm before you start explaining how it works.
So the suggestion is pretty simple. Just execute a cold open with it, or move the anecdote to immediately follow your introduction.
Don't save the best evidence for last.
Right. Start the body of the piece with something like, let me tell you about Sarah. She was fine making $8K a month. She told the bank she made $15K, and suddenly she couldn't log in without dodging 3 insurance offers.
Yes, that hooks the listener emotionally.
And you use that story to demonstrate the algorithm changing, rather than describing it abstractly first. It anchors the entire argument in reality.
It also sets the stakes right away. It changes the narrative from, here's how banks work, to, don't let this happen to you.
Okay, so once you have them hooked with the story, you have to hit them with the why.
Right.
And the concept of ability to pay pricing is the strongest intellectual hook in the whole piece. But right now, it's buried way too deep in the middle.
I noticed that too. The script spends a significant amount of time just complaining about the pop-up itself, how annoying it is, how it blocks the screen.
Yeah, the mechanics of it.
Before ever explaining why the bank is doing it.
And the weakness there is that the listener might just think, okay, so they want to send me more credit card offers.
Which is an annoyance. It's not a financial injury.
Exactly. The real revelation is that a higher income might lead to higher interest rates because you're not price sensitive. That's counterintuitive, and it's fascinating.
But it's diluted by all the general complaints about marketing emails.
Oh, interest rate.
Right.
But this piece flips that on its head. It reveals the algorithm actually thinks high income equals low price sensitivity, so charge them more.
That is the headline. That's the whole thing.
So the suggestion is to move that price sensitivity argument right to the front. Make it your primary evidence, immediately after the anecdote.
Front load the paradox? You have to open the technical argument with it.
You have to say, you think a higher income makes you a safe borrower who deserves low rates. But the algorithm sees a customer who won't even notice an extra 2% APR.
That stops the scroll. Instantly.
It transforms the issue from an annoyance into an actual financial penalty.
And honestly, I'd probably cut the general complaints about, insurance packages and upsells. We all know banks spam us.
It weakens the core point.
It does. Focus strictly on the interest rate calculation. That's the financial harm that hurts the wallet.
Yeah, if you tell me banks want your data to send you ads, I don't care. I have a spam filter.
Right.
But if you tell me banks want your data to charge you a privacy tax, now I'm listening.
Okay, so once you've established the harm, you really need to address the sophistication of the audience. The material warns against the dangers of higher credit limits, which is fine, but it totally overlooks a critical counterargument about credit utilization ratios.
This is where the script risks losing the experts in the audience.
For sure.
It basically argues that a higher credit limit is just more rope to hang yourself, and implies that keeping limits low is always better.
Which is a very paternalistic view, isn't it? It just assumes the listener has zero self-control.
Yeah.
But I wonder, have we considered the optimizer in the audience? Because for someone who's financially disciplined, this argument is just factually incomplete.
Right. The weakness is that it ignores the actual mechanics of a FICO score. A higher limit with the same spending lowers your utilization ratio.
Which is a primary factor in boosting a credit score.
It is. So if I'm a listener who tracks my score, and I hear the host say,
never get a credit limit increase, I'm going to think the host doesn't know what they're talking about.
You lose all credibility. They'll think, well, this person doesn't get that I want a $30,000 limit, so my $2,000 spending looks like a drop in the bucket to the credit bureaus.
So the suggestion here is to acknowledge that utilization benefit. It's about gaining credibility with those savvy listeners. You don't have to change your whole stance, just add some nuance.
You insert a yes, but clause.
Exactly.
Something like, while higher limits can tempt overspending, they are also a powerful tool for the disciplined.
Yeah, a $30,000 limit with $2,000 in spending looks much better to an algorithm than a $5,000 limit with the same spending.
You have to differentiate between the spender persona, who needs restriction, and the optimizer persona, who wants high limits for score manipulation.
It shows the audience you understand the nuances of the game, rather than just preaching abstinence. It respects their intelligence.
Speaking of respect, let's talk about the tone.
Okay.
The material makes a really strong case for privacy, but the use of all this loaded vocabulary, it creates a sense of urgency that I think risks sounding like a conspiracy theory instead of financial analysis.
I felt that heavily. I was reading through and I circled words like ammunition, weaponized, trap, and predatory.
They're everywhere.
They appear very frequently. And the weakness is that while this is, high retention language, it alienates the skeptic.
It does.
Yet positions the bank as this cartoon villain rather than a rational economic actor. If I'm a listener who works in finance, or just someone who doesn't see the world as us versus them, this hyperbole just pushes me away.
It sounds more like a manifesto than advice. And you want the listener to feel smart, not just scared.
The suggestion is to shift the framing. Go from malice to asymmetric information. It makes the argument sound so much smarter and harder to dismiss.
Asymmetric information. That is a much stronger hook for a sophisticated audience.
Right?
So instead of saying you're handing them ammunition, which sounds like warfare,
You phrase it as you're reducing your informational advantage.
and instead of the bank wants to trap you, you use the bank is optimizing for lifetime value or LTV at your expense.
It describes the exact same mechanism, but it strips away the emotion and replaces it with economics.
Precisely. You could even state it explicitly. Banks aren't evil. They're profit-maximizing algorithms. You don't need to fear them. You just need to starve the algorithm of data.
I love that. That turns the listener from a victim into a strategist.
It creates a feeling of being an insider rather than just a target. It really elevates the whole discourse.
Okay, so now let's look at the actual advice being given. The section on data decay is brilliant. The idea that stale data protects you.
Yeah, that's great.
But it needs to be operationalized. It needs to be a clear do and don't list for the listener.
The concept of decay is fantastic. Stale data is less valuable. It's a very tactical way to think about privacy.
It is.
But the weakness is that the advice is just scattered. It tells the user to be intentional, but then it leaves the decision matrix a little vague.
Right.
It mentions mortgages versus credit cards, but it feels like a suggestion, not a rule set. And be intentional isn't actionable advice. What does that mean when I'm staring at a login screen?
The listener needs a flowchart. The suggestion is to create a clear hierarchy of disclosure to end the piece.
Categorize the advice strictly. You need to break it down into, say, 3 tiers.
Tier 1, must provide. That's your mortgages, your federal loans, anything where income verification is legally mandated or essential.
Tier 2, strategic provide. That's like a new credit card application where you need to state a specific income just to get approved.
You're trading data for a specific asset. Exactly. And Tier 3, never provide. This is the most important one.
This is the pop-up.
This is the pop-up. Mid-relationship pop-ups, update your profile emails, those credit limit increase prompts, unless you specifically went looking for them.
And giving it a label like data minimization strategy or hierarchy of disclosure, that gives the user a mental model they can actually use next time they log in.
It makes it real, and you have to give them permission to break the sort of compliance training we all have. Banks rely on social compliance. We asked, so you must answer.
Right.
And breaking that requires very specific, confident instructions. Never provide in a pop-up. That's a simple, portable rule.
That's a really good point.
So looking at the big picture here, we're taking a script that has this great core idea, privacy as a financial strategy, and we're just tightening the screws to make it definitive.
Moving it from a rant to a playbook.
Yeah, let's visualize how this flows now. You start with the story of Sarah, the contractor. You hook them with the pain.
Then you hit them with the price sensitivity paradox.
You explain that the bank wants to charge them more because they're rich. That's the big so what.
Then you address the credit score nuance. You acknowledge the utilization benefits, so the experts in the audience keep listening.
You clean up the language. No more warfare, just economics. You treat the bank as a rational actor, which makes you look like the rational actor.
And finally, you give them the hierarchy of disclosure, a checklist they can stick on their monitor.
That is a complete piece. It respects the listener's time, it respects their intelligence, and it gives them something they can use today.
This is what we're looking for. A good rant turned into a great analysis.
Absolutely.
So to recap, the source material has a high retention premise, data privacy as a financial strategy. But to make it land, we have 5 concrete steps.
First, acknowledge that high limits help credit scores for responsible users. You can't scare off the experts.
Second, replace that warfare language with economic asymmetry language. It builds authority.
Third, you've got to front-load the price sensitivity paradox. It's the most surprising fact, so put it where it can do the most work.
Fourth, provide a strict hierarchy of disclosure checklist. You have to make the advice usable.
And fifth, move that contractor anecdote earlier. Anchor the theory in reality before you get into the weeds.
This isn't just about privacy. It's about not helping a casino calculate your odds. Submit your work again once you've adjusted the tone, and we'll see if the argument holds up.